Today, we will introduce you to some of the most notorious killers in history. One of the most famous cases studied in the field of psychology is that of a killer who was beloved by others, but committed dozens of crimes, torture, and abuses. We will be exploring the story of the killer John Wayne Gacy, who contributed to an increase in the number of people affected by chlorophobia, the fear of clowns. John Wayne Gacy ranked first on the list of the world's most horrifying horror killers. He was a husband and a father, and he identified his victims by interacting with them within affluent communities and various parties that he attended as a clown named Pogo. Despite being one of the most dangerous killers, he was also involved in numerous volunteer activities. John's childhood was difficult due to his father's alcohol addiction, and he and his siblings were victims of domestic violence by their father. He also suffered sexual abuse from a family friend, but never dared to tell anyone. He always tried to seek the love of others. John was born in Chicago on March 17, 1942. He was the second born, with an older sister named Joan and a younger sister named Karen. They all attended a Catholic school. When John discovered his attraction to males, he dropped out of high school and moved to Las Vegas to escape his father. He later returned home and graduated from the business college. He got a job at the Numbers shoe store, where he quickly rose through the ranks and became the manager of the Springfield branch in Illinois. He was friendly and made friends with neighbors, and no one ever complained about him. He hosted many parties, dressed as a clown to bring joy to children in hospitals, and was deeply involved in charitable work to improve his community. Everyone saw him as a polite and kind person who worked hard and was devoted to his family and the community. But no one ever saw the other side of his personality. He changed jobs frequently until he married Marilyn Myers in 1954. She asked for a divorce after his first conviction in August 1967 when he sexually assaulted a 15-year-old boy. His father reported him to the police, and John was arrested for sexually assaulting Donald and attempting to assault 16-year-old Edward Lynch. He denied the charges and requested a polygraph test, but he failed the test. He later admitted to assaulting Donald. His trial began on November 7, 1968, and on December 3rd, he was sentenced to 10 years in prison at the Iowa State Penitentiary for the Donald case, and he was not convicted in the other case. John was an ideal prisoner, avoiding trouble and drawing attention to himself in hopes of an early release. Indeed, he was released after 18 months on June 18, 1970. He was put on parole for a year and had certain conditions, such as living with his mother in Chicago and not roaming after 10 p.m. He returned to his hometown of Chicago. After 8 months of being under supervision, he was accused of sexually assaulting a teenager. He lured the boy into his car at the Greyhound bus station in Chicago, took him to his home, and raped him. As the boy did not show up on June 22nd, the court dismissed the case. In 1972, he remarried a woman named Carol Huff, who was aware of his criminal past but didn't care much. She believed in his sincerity and repentance and his determination to change his life for the better. However, they separated in 1975. On one occasion, a young man filed a complaint against him, alleging that he tricked him by using a police badge to get him into his car and then sexually assaulted him. John was arrested and charged with aggravated sexual assault and reckless behavior, but the charges were dropped after the accuser attempted to blackmail him. John lured a boy named Tony, who was 16 years old and worked for John's contracting company. He claimed he playfully handcuffed him, but then tried to undress Tony. Tony managed to free himself, pinned John to the ground, and only let him go after John promised not to approach him again. The incident passed, and John kept Tony employed for about a year after that. There was another boy named Johnny Buktovich, 17 years old, who also worked for the company, but disappeared under mysterious circumstances after a dispute with John over unpaid wages for 2 weeks. That was the last time anyone saw him alive. John committed a new crime in the same month, with the victim being Bailey Carroll, a 16-year-old boy who acted as a liaison between teenage homosexuals and adult men seeking sexual favors in exchange for money. On that day, he left his home and never returned. During that period, there were multiple reports of missing teenagers, some of whom worked for John's contracting company. However, the police never connected these reports. In 1977, Jean Schutz disappeared in the same mysterious manner along with his Plymouth car, and no one has seen him alive since then. A few days later, a teenager was arrested in a Plymouth car of the same model, and the young man shouted that the man he shared accommodation with would explain why he was driving that car. That person was John, who claimed that Stepanek had sold him his car a short time ago. The police did not investigate the matter further at that time, including the signed bill of sale, which was signed 18 days after Schitz's disappearance, and the signature was not necessarily his. In late 1978, his crimes came to an end when Robert Priest, a 15-year-old boy who worked at a pharmacy, was reported missing. His mother was waiting for him in her car, but he never showed up. She filed a police report stating that he had an appointment with the owner of a contracting company who promised him a job. It was discovered through investigation that this contractor was John Gacy. Lieutenant Joseph Kozenchak, who was in charge of the investigation into Robert's disappearance, approached Gacy to ask him some questions and requested that he come to the station to give his official statement. However, Gacy cited a family death that required him to stay at home to receive condolences over the phone and promised to go to the police station after a few hours. When he went, he claimed not to know any details that would help with the investigation into the young man's disappearance and then returned home. The lieutenant was not satisfied with that testimony and started searching Gacy's records, finding a criminal record that included conviction for sexually assaulting a teenage boy. This prompted him to obtain a search warrant for Gacy's house. In 1978, the police raided the house of John Wayne Gacy, but he was not present. They were struck by the foul smell of the basement and found the place sprinkled with lime, but they did not find anything suspicious during their initial search. They proceeded to examine the samples taken from the house. Gacy was summoned to be questioned about the things they found in his house. Upon seeing them, he became angry and contacted his lawyer, who advised him not to sign the rights waiver paper guaranteed to him by the law. The police did not have sufficient evidence to arrest him, so they questioned him about the disappearance of Robert and then released him. But they kept him under daily surveillance. He was later arrested on drug possession charges, unaware that he had already confessed to a friend that he had indeed killed Robert Priest. Not only that, but he also confessed to his friend that he had killed over 30 people because they had attempted to blackmail him. While in prison, Jeffrey Ringel, a boy who had survived being kidnapped and raped on May 22, 1978, was searching for his assailant. He remembered a highway where he was waiting before being drugged by Gacy, and he followed the same car to Gacy's house. When the assailant was identified, Jeffrey went to court to accuse him of sexual assault. Finally, evidence of his crimes was found. The police discovered that one of the rings found in the house belonged to the victim John Schitz, and they also discovered the mysterious disappearance of 3 other employees from Gacy's company. Furthermore, a receipt for the purchase of film was found, and it belonged to one of Priest's colleagues who claimed that Gacy had given it to him on the night of his disappearance. With the revelation of this evidence, the investigators realized the magnitude of the case unfolding before them. The police returned to search his house again, and at that time, Gacy confessed to killing a person in self-defense and burying the body under the garage. During the search, an unnatural bulge was found in the basement floor, and upon digging, they found the remains of the first victim. Forensic pathologist Dr. Robert Stein was called in to assist with the investigation. When he arrived, he recognized a familiar smell, the smell of death. On the first day of excavation, they found 2 bodies, one of John Butkovich under the garage and the other in the basement. As the days went by, the number of bodies increased. Some of them still had their underwear stuffed in their throats, while others were buried next to each other, leading investigators to suspect that they were killed around the same time. Gacy's testimony confirmed that he sometimes killed more than one person at a time. Throughout the excavation, the number of bodies found under the house reached 27. On a previous date, the police had found the body of Frank Wayne Landigan in a river in Illinois, but they were unaware of the atrocities committed by John Gacy. However, they found Frank Wayne's driver's license at the killer's house. They also found the deceased Frank Mazzara, famously known as Mojo, in the same location and the same condition. By that time, the number of victims had reached 29. Gacy confessed to his crimes in detail after realizing there was no escape. He admitted to killing more than 30 people and burying their bodies under his house. He would lure his victims, bind them with handcuffs, and then proceeded to rape them. He would silence them by placing underwear in their mouths and ultimately kill them by strangulation or by pushing a wooden board into their throats. Discoveries and surprises continued to unfold. In the backyard of the house, the body of a man with a wedding ring on one of his left fingers was found. Investigators realized that his victims were not limited to teenagers and homosexuals, but also included married men. This information was confirmed a week later when another man's body was discovered. The 31st body was found in the Illinois River, belonging to Timothy O'Rourke, and another body was found beneath the crawl space in the house's game room. In April 1979, the remains of a body were discovered in the depths of the Illinois River, tangled in something that made it difficult to find. The police investigation continued as they searched for records of the victims and compared them to identify the identities of the bodies they had found. They were able to identify all of them, except for 9 victims. After the completion of the search for the victims, the trial began on February 6, 1980, in the state of Illinois. The jury found the defendant John Wayne Gacy guilty and sentenced him to death by lethal injection. When the execution was carried out in 1994, Gacy showed no remorse for his actions. The last words he exchanged with his lawyer were, "My execution is not going to bring all those boys back to life." His final words in this world were a vulgar insult directed at one of the guards as he was led to the execution chamber. The injection process was initially unsuccessful as the chemical froze in the connecting tube, preventing the poison from flowing into his veins. The officials rectified the error by replacing the substance and the tube, and the execution took 18 minutes to complete. John Wayne Gacy was officially declared dead. Cheers of joy erupted from the gathered crowd outside the prison, announcing the transfer of the terrifying serial killer from our world to another, where he would undoubtedly face his just punishment. Remember to subscribe to the channel, like the video, and activate the notification bell for any new updates on the world of crime.